Shove it, man!
The WCW Cruiserweight division was one of the highlights of WCW throughout the 90s. It introduced the mainstream audiences to the likes of Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho. It also pretty much guaranteed a 4-star match whenever these guys were handling their business. So it didn't really matter if you had the big guys on the show too, as WCW was catering to several different audiences at once. But as everybody knows, nothing lasts forever, and by 1999 we witnessed the slow, brutal and painful decline of a once powerful title. This is the downfall of the WCW Cruiserweight title, and I'm the Hawk and you're listening to me talk. Things started going badly for the belt towards the end of 1999, and maybe you guys can help me put 2 and 2 together here, but it was around the time that Russo and Ferrara signed with WCW. This could possibly explain the major changes in the division. Rey Mysterio Jr was the champion, but he lost the belt to Lenny Lane. At the time, Lenny and Lodi were doing a homosexual angle. That in itself is not a problem. The problem is that most of Lenny's matches involved grinding on his opponents and genuinely ruining the flow of the matches with his antics. Now you've all watched these WCW Cruiserweight matches from the past. There's nothing worse than the flow getting disrupted. That's what these matches are all about. Fast paced, hard hitting moves and everything looking fluent. These matches did not. Most of them ended in screwy ways as well. A month passed by of these shenanigans. Then, suddenly on an episode of Thunder, Psychosis turned up and he was now apparently the champion? WCW claimed that he'd beaten Lenny Lane at a house show, but this is lies. What had actually happened was that WCW was starting to get complaints about the portrayals of homosexuals getting beaten up, so they got scared and they switched the belt. I guess they were too scared to show Lane getting beaten up again, so they didn't bother doing a match for the belt. It's an incredible one-day title reign for Psychosis, who had just unmasked. Maybe this was his reward. Psychosis lost his belt in a 3-minute match to the gifted Glenn Gilberti. Say it all with me, how is he gifted? The fact that Disco is not a luchador is not the problem. The fact that he didn't wrestle a balls to the wall style is also not the problem. The problem is that we just had the title held by a comedy wrestler and angle with Lenny Lane. Did we need another one in Disco? With Disco as champion, they continued the more sports entertainment based style of booking. Lenny Lane and Disco were the first Cruiserweight champions in the history of the belt that didn't wrestle the balls to the wall style. He defended the title just a few times. One of them, strangely coming against Vampiro, which just doesn't sound like a Cruiserweight matchup. Speaking of which, the commentary team often talk about a weight limit for the title, and that Disco seems to be too heavy. Nobody thought to weigh him though. At Mayhem, Mike Tenay accused Disco of not caring about the title when a wild Slapnuts appeared and attacked him.
Jeff Jarrett.
What followed was a wacky match against Evan Courageous, who was in an equally wacky relationship with Madusa. It's a match that absolutely nobody wanted to see. It wasn't the Cruiserweight match that WCW fans have become accustomed to, and loud chants of boring erupted from the crowd. Courageous beats him with a crossbody, ending his title reign at 48 days. So now Evan Courageous is the champion, the least popular member of 3 Count after Shane Helms and Jeff Hardy's stoner friend. He's also a wrestler that was pretty green after graduating from the power plant. There's actually far worse to come though. For some reason, WCW decided to try and turn this belt into an intergender title. Hey, I guess that's one way to get around the weight limits of the roided up WCW. Madusa, Evan and Molly Holly had a triple threat, and Madusa pinned Evan Courageous to become the #1 contender. Whilst at the same time, she was his girlfriend and his manager. Things turned rocky for Evan when he was caught flirting with Nitro Girl Spice. Yes, this is a video about the Cruiserweight title, and I don't blame you for needing a reminder of that. Evan ends up ditching Madusa for Spice, and they will now have a match on the Starrcade pay-per-view. Sounds like a match worth paying for? It's not. Spice promptly turns on Evan with one of the worst low blows of all time, and Madusa beats him with a German. That one ends Evan's title reign at just 28 days and 0 successful defences. At the same time, Madusa becomes the first woman to hold the belt. Madusa would be a fighting champion with a defence against another woman, Asia, and also someone who's such a legend in the wrestling business that they just have no name, instead it's question marks. Just use the women's title properly, you morons, you don't need to be using this one. It's why you hired Madusa in the first place, it makes me so angry. At the same time, Madusa uses the title to push feminism and show that women can wrestle as well as men. She gets booed for all her promos. So as she's a heel, or at least I think she's meant to be, for some strange reason Madusa enters a feud with Oklahoma. This was Ed Ferrara doing a bad impersonation of Jim Ross with Balls palsy. He thought women should get back in the kitchen. I'm really not sure who we're supposed to be cheering for here. They have an evening gown match where Oklahoma strips her and then covers her in barbecue sauce. At this point, the Cruiserweight title and all its history is in the bin covered in bird turd. On the following show, Oklahoma also beats her with a broom and steals her belt. So of course, this belt would need to be contested at the sold out 2000 pay-per-view. Once again, imagine paying for this. Despite Oklahoma, who is not an athlete by the way, getting battered by 3 women at once, he still wins a terrible match to become the new Cruiserweight champion. That ends Madusa's title reign at 28 days, and what a 28 days it was. 2 days later on Thunder, Oklahoma decides to vacate the Cruiserweight title, seemingly because they didn't want to inflict another Oklahoma match on us. He was also a little bit too heavy for this division. A horrendous stain on the company. The vacant title would be contested at Super Brawl 2000 between the artist formerly known as Prince Iakea. By the way, I actually heard he's the cousin of Sonny Don't Look at My Ass Siaki. Not sure if that's true or not though. And he faces Lash LaRue. Again, it's not really the two sort of wrestlers that WCW used to book in the Cruiserweight division. Side note, but don't you love how in WCW complete jobbers have the most elaborate and expensive of entrances? The match quality doesn't exactly improve with the artist formerly known as Don't Look at My Ass. He had constant 2-minute matches ending in the wackiest of fashions. Constant interference from his manager Paisley and other people just randomly turning up. One commentator was left describing his matches as an asylum on wheels. The artist displayed a complete lack of personality and once again his style was not very exciting. I did like his DDT finisher though. He does actually defend the belt on pay-per-view against Psychosis. It wasn't the best match ever, but they got 7 minutes and that was a lot for this period of time. Then, for some asinine reason, yeah I said ass, Billy Kidman beat him for the belt on a house show, ending his reign at 39 days. And then the Prince took the belt back from him on a house show a day later. 9 days after this, Russo stripped all of the titles in WCW. He gathered up all of the belts and says he has them all now before heading off to collect the world title. The Cruiserweight title was not even seen in the shot, because it's not important to them. This belt had been vacated twice in 3 months at this point. At Spring Stampede, the vacant title was contested between 6 men in a 5-minute match. Plus, Daffney and Tammy constantly interfering. Only one man in the match was a luchador, which perfectly highlights the management's change in opinions of wrestlers which should be competing in these kind of matches. The match is just way too short and chaotic. Chris Candido winning the belt does give you a little bit of hope, but that hope would be short-lived. After just 1 title defense, a match was set up for Nitro in which Chris Candido and Tammy defend the Cruiserweight title in a tag match against Daffney and Crowbar. What's their damn obsession with intergender matches in this division? And this period is somehow even worse than Oklahoma as champion, and you'll see why in a moment. Well, they proceed to have one of the worst mixed tag matches of all time. They just do whatever the hell they want. Daffney is constantly screaming and Tammy can't wrestle very well. They literally just keep hitting moves with the others watching on. It's hard to suspend your disbelief with a match like this. Crowbar has to hold a chair to his own face and wait for Tammy to baseball slide him, which takes forever. Then she hits him in the head with the chair. Then Stacy Keibler starts dancing for absolutely no reason. Tammy hits a Stone Cold Stunner which Daffney completely no-sells. Look at this, it's ridiculous. And then she just rolls up Tammy for the 3. So then we get confusion over who is the real champion now, Daffney or Crowbar. But before that important question could even be answered, Ric Flair storms to the ring and beats the piss out of Crowbar. Way to make your champions look strong, WCW. Chris Candido's reign lasted 29 days by the way, in case you wondered. So officially, Crowbar and Daffney are double champions now, but that situation would only last 6 days. This had to be settled. Only one person could hold this prestigious belt. So on Nitro we get Daffney versus Crowbar. Yay, more intergender wrestling. They do a dumb thumb war. They do rock, paper, scissors. Daffney gives him a wedgie. Crowbar is hesitant and doesn't want to hurt his friend. Candido and Tammy interfere and the ref doesn't care. The women catfight and it's the 50th catfight I've seen in this video. Crowbar stops Tammy using a chair on his opponent Daffney and Candido promptly kicks it into his face. Chris Candido tries to tombstone Crowbar into the chair, but the chair moves during the move, and Daffney is now officially the sole Cruiserweight champion. She even successfully defends the title in a triple threat against the artist and Candido. She spends the entire match decked out in a wedding dress. Tammy smashes her own husband with a clipboard by mistake and Daffney falls on top of him for the free. It is crazy how much the match quality differs from 3 years prior. She's put in another triple threat match again after this time against Gifted Glenn and Chavo Guerrero. This time there's hundreds of people around the ring. Kimberly and Stacy Keibler and Major Guns interfere. Yes, this is not the women's title. Chavo Guerrero pins Disco after interference from Booker T. That ends Daffney's title reign at 14 days. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a massive Daffney fan, for her character work and her risk-taking bravery. But the point I'm making is that this was destroying the title's credibility with £150 women doing comedy matches. They should have done this with the hardcore belt, which was never relevant in the first place. Things did slightly improve with Chavo as champion, and he and Juventuud Guerrero tried to restore some credibility at Bash at the Beach 2000. That is despite an avalanche of interference. The problem is the title had been buried for almost an entire year at this point. In typical WCW fashion, there was still time to discredit the title 2 more times. After 54 days, Lance Storm beat Chavo Guerrero for the title. He renamed the title the Under 101kg belt. But after just 13 days, he decided to give the title away to his friend Elix Skipper. If you're going to give this title to anybody, Skipper is not a bad choice, but just don't give the belt away. Have him win a damn match. This title's already been through enough turmoil this year. With Skipper as champion, he mostly only defended the belt on C shows, which nobody watched because nobody apparently wanted to see the Cruiserweight title. Sorry, the Under 101kg title. Elix Skipper lost the title to Mike Sanders in, get this, a 2-on-1 handicap powerbomb match. Skipper versus Sanders and Nash. This feels an awful long way away from the title's glory days. The whole match, Kevin Nash is cutting a promo. Nash jokes about young guys doing jumps off the top rope because this would never actually happen in a real fight. Then Elix Skipper dives on him with a kick. That did make me laugh. This is the comedy division. Nash hits the powerbomb, but Sanders makes the cover, so it doesn't even make sense, and Sanders is crowned the Cruiserweight champion. Skipper held that belt for 48 days. From here, the booking seems to have got a bit more sensible after this, with Sanders holding the belt for 62 days, Chavo Guerrero again holding the belt for 103 days, and finally Shane Helms for 109 days before WWF took over the company. Despite the downfall of the title, the WWF decided to keep this belt around until 2007. But don't worry WCW boys, it can only get worse, because Hornswoggle is the final champion. Now I bet you're all wondering, how could we go from this to this? How could this division slip so far? Well, several reasons. Rey Mysterio suffered a very bad injury when performing a Frankensteiner in the Ready to Rumble movie. His knee was screwed up for 6 months and he was off telly. Also around this time, the Rascals left for the WWF, and Eddie and Dean were both big parts of the WCW Cruiserweight division. Chris Jericho had gone to the WWF, and he was another person who was often found in this division. Ultimo Dragon, previously an important part of this division, retired from the company in 1998. Billy Kidman, another big part of the division, was feuding with Hogan, so he wasn't really having cruiserweight matches. Look, this is not me making excuses for WCW. Of course, they could have tried to use some of the lower card luchadors, tried to create a new star, just tried to not turn it into a complete joke. But in reality, they didn't really have the roster to pull off a cruiserweight division at this time. Maybe they should have just deactivated the belt until a later date when they were ready. Vince Russo was not a fan of long matches and preferred characters over in-ring work. The problem is, the WCW characters were not the same as the ones he worked with in the WWF. These were mostly inexperienced young green guys just trying to figure out what they're doing in this business. So for me, the booking did not help in the slightest, but for me, talent was the main issue in the downfall of the Cruiserweight division. And if you don't agree with that, I'll take away your vision.